Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Grace Zacaroli, who's here to share with us her book, The Carpenter and The Apprentice. So are you looking for inspiration to turn hardship into purpose? Well, today's guest is going to share with us just that. So Grace Zacaroli is a retired psychotherapist who has worked as a Reiki master, rebirther, yoga instructor, and intuitive health practitioner. With multiple degrees and a vested interest in helping people on their journeys to well-being, she currently serves as a certified life coach. So welcome to the show, Grace Zacaroli.
Thanks for having me, Marianne.
My goodness, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about your book. Can you share a little bit about this story with us?
This is the first in a series of 4 books taking place in the ancient Middle East in a time of war. The protagonist, the main character in this first book, his name is Danat, is a young man in his early 20s who has suffered great traumas and losses and has numbed himself out to cope with that. He's wandering the land, he's tied to no one and no place, and he comes to a small village. And in this town, this village, he encounters a wise old sage whom we now know of as the Carpenter. And he resists the lessons that he potentially can learn from the Carpenter at first. But he comes around and begins to embark on what is truly a spiritual and personal journey. The story is really born out of a desire to do exactly that, to weave some age-old wisdom into a story. And the purpose behind that is kind of goes back to one of the distinctions that the Carpenter, one of the main characters, makes himself. He distinguishes between experiencing meaning and understanding things in a more kind of cognitive way. So in keeping with that, what I wanted to do was create an experience for readers where they could encounter some of this wisdom, much of which they may have read before in various spiritual books, but in a way that brings it a little bit closer to their own personal experience. Perhaps one or two of the characters are particularly relatable, and they can then integrate those lessons differently. They can experience the meanings in each of those, whether it's a life lesson or a sort of a thematic content piece that weaves through a number of situations and characters, that it brings it to life in a different way than just a sort of more didactic text would.
Well, your book really dives deep into themes of transformation and personal growth. So what life lessons do you hope readers take away from this book?
I think the life lessons are best characterized in the characters themselves, and I don't want to give too much away about each of them other than the fact that I simply adore all of them. But some of the things that the characters encounter are things like having to get past our defenses in order to have real connection, having to master ego and the way our egoic mind works. Some of the characters are overcoming significant trauma and learning to live their lives fully in that sort of context as well. But the overarching hope that I have is that people learn that growth and development of more meaning and purpose in their lives is actually possible. We tend to sort of think of it as this sort of cerebral activity, but it's actually something you can live and breathe and inhabit, which I think the characters really demonstrate.
In your book, the Carpenter often imparts very profound wisdom through seemingly simple acts. How did you craft this character to embody such depth?
I think the character is a beautiful, fairly idealized character who himself embodies those simple truths. So the idea throughout this book is that not only do we practice these things, but we come to sort of embody them. We live these principles, which he does. And I do think that the truths that are most easily assimilated are those that are simpler. There's actually almost more meaning in them, and there's more room for people to discover their meaning, to experience that meaning. So the hope is that this Carpenter both shares some wisdom, but also embodies it in ways that many of the great sages that we read about have done.
In your book, community plays such a pivotal role in Danette's healing. So how does this reflect on the importance of community in real-life personal growth?
I think we tend to talk a lot about community, particularly in our Western culture, but I'm not sure that we're always connected to what that really means, to the shared sense of purpose, the vulnerability, the willingness to kind of hang in there and grow together through the tough spots. But we really do need that connection to grow. We need the challenges of connection and we need the blessings of being connected to other people. And then we need the growth that comes from giving back. So, kind of stepping away from some of the more transactional ways we approach relationship when you're actually deeply in relationship, your whole person is a little bit laid bare. And that can be a really healing, empowering, and certainly growth producing experience.
So this novel has very strong spiritual undertones. What personal philosophies or spiritual traditions influence the aspect of this work?
When I first started working on this project, I was joking with friends that I would talk to while I was in process with it, that it felt like a cross between the Bhagavad Gita and The Way of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman. Not that I would, think of myself on that caliber, but certainly this book is inspired greatly by Eastern philosophies, yoga philosophy, Hinduism, Buddhism, and then the teachings of a lot of the indigenous wisdom keepers of the world have certainly influenced some of the things that come out in this book and certainly in the second book. But I do think a lot of the life lessons presented, you're going to find those are pretty common across multiple faith and traditions, wisdom traditions, even just basic sort of ethics. They're very shared, but somehow we seem to have lost track of the fact that we do share these ideas.
I love how in your book you talk about carpentry, but it transcends woodworking. And I'd love for you to share what this metaphor means.
So the character of the carpenter literally was sort of given to me, it just came through that way. And I did some hemming and hawing about that. Because like, well, that seems kind of like, number one, could be seen as presumptuous. Number two, it's been done. But it just seemed so organically connected to what was happening in the book that I really felt like I just needed to honor it and go with it. And it literally shaped itself as I would write about the carpenter and as he was working, that flow, the rhythm of his work actually sort of came into the sentence structures a lot of the time and into the flow of the interactions with Danette, the young protagonist. So it seemed as I reflected on it, there were times when I would think, should I rethink this analogy? But it just seemed like it was intrinsic to the book. So most of it is I just received that blessing.
Well, I love how it really shows about crafting one's soul. There's so
Mhm.
much more to this metaphor, and I really appreciate the fact that you chose this.
Well, thank you.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Grace Zacaroli in regards to her new book, The Carpenter and The Apprentice. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
Are you an author, speaker, or expert who is looking for more publicity? Visit radioguestlist.com and sign up for free interview requests from shows looking for guests. Radio Guest List is the #1 free booking resource for radio, podcasts, and TV talk shows who are looking for experts like you right now. Visit radioguestlist.com and sign up today to get the visibility you deserve.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special. When you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
It's one thing to become attached to your perfect home, but what do you do when that home becomes attached to you? A family in dire need of a fresh start, a mysterious house tied to the past. Buried deep within the foundation of the old Far Hill Manor lies a centuries-old secret. Dark forces or something stronger just waiting to be discovered. Caretaker, a supernatural thriller by breakout authors R.J. Halpert.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with special guest, Grace Zacaroli, who's sharing with us her new novel, The Carpenter and The Apprentice. So the character of Donat, he begins as a very troubled young man. So what was the most challenging part in developing this arc?
I think probably for me, the most challenging part was sort of the pacing of his growth. I didn't want it to be so fast that it seemed completely unbelievable and unrelatable, but also I didn't want it to get too bogged down, which sometimes that sort of interior process can do that. Hopefully I struck the right balance there, but that was certainly my biggest challenge in working with that. And I think the tensions within him, it's tempting sometimes to fall into over explaining, And so again, hopefully I found the right balance between laying them bare, but without getting too set into them. But yeah, that was an ongoing challenge.
Well, you did that so masterfully. I've got to say, I really appreciated how that part unfolded, because I think that could be really difficult to show the complexities of a character.
Oh, thank you. As I said, I just enjoy each of these characters, and I'm excited about the other books in the series, which will kind of get into some of the other characters more too, which is really wonderful.
So how does the dynamic between Donat and the Carpenter mirror real-life mentor-mentee relationships?
I think it's fairly idealized, but I do think sometimes we need those ideals because they give us something to strive towards. But I think in general, when you look at the really more profound sort of mentor-mentee relationships, the mentor tends to take a very passionate but humble and dedicated, very purposeful stance with regard to the mentee. At the same time, most mentors, the ones that really kind of bring out the best in people, don't spoon feed them. And I think we often today, we look to be spoon fed a lot of the time. The Carpenter doesn't do that. He's going to challenge Donat. He's going to give him some information, but he's going to step back and let Donat wrestle with it. And I think that is something that a little bit idealized relative to what happens today, but, maybe not so far off the mark. And as for Donat, he has to, one of his big life lessons is he's got to overcome his intellectual defenses and his egoic defenses to humble himself and be willing to dig deep. And he does that. I think he becomes relatable on both sides, both with his challenges and in his rising through those.
Well, in your book, you share both external conflict and internal conflict, external being that there's a war, and internal within Donat himself. So how do these elements enhance the narrative?
I think the conflict, which is probably the case in most stories, the conflict is sort of a driver for the plot, but it's also a driver for a lot of the evolution of the characters. So the external conflict of the war drives the plot. It forces action at times, or it inspires characters to anticipate things and to plan accordingly. Internal conflict really moves that interior, spiritual, personal growth process. I mean, we are very sort of dialectic in nature, we human beings, at least at this time. And so we do experience those inner conflicts. And a lot of times they feel super uncomfortable. And a lot of times they feel like you're not getting anywhere. And you'll see there are times when that happens to Donat. But when you hang in there with that process unfolds and you really do get to move through the growth process.
So, how did you ensure that the philosophical messages didn't overshadow the adventure and storytelling in this book?
Two things came up there for me. One is kind of going back to Donat's character development, is trying to find that balance, the balance between that more didactic messaging and just letting the story unfold. And there were times when I literally just sort of sat back and, what are we going to do now? And it would just come through. And I think connected to that is probably the most important thing that I did was to get out of the way. In the past, when I've tried to do some writing, I've been in my head too much, or I've been overthinking approach or content or one of those things. And with this book, it literally, people say this all the time, but it really did, in a way, almost write itself. It just came through. And most of the time, I would just get out of the way. And then sometimes I'd have to back off and re-outline and restructure things, and certainly did a lot of editing. But really, the main flow of it really just kind of came through, and it was a beautiful experience. I feel like I got a great gift.
So, as a psychotherapist and life coach, did any of your professional experiences shape the narrative?
So I certainly did. It's inevitable that that's going to happen for any of us, that our life experience, personal and professional, is going to influence our artwork. In terms of the therapy and the coaching influence, I've really had the privilege, and I don't use that word lightly. I've had the privilege to be with people as they were encountering really dark, difficult times, as they were coming through those times, as they were celebrating their coming through those times. I've watched people grow. I've listened to their courage and their strengths, and that definitely shapes my understanding of the characters, both their internal dynamics and their relational dynamics. I think it's had a pretty significant role to play.
What would you like our audience and listeners to take away from this book?
Probably, in essence, I'd love people to take away a sense of hope. We're in a time now that's pretty troubled. We are, all of us, spread very thin. We're often engaged in things that take us out of ourselves, away from spiritual meaning, away from purpose. And I think that we forget that that's always possible, even in the most chaotic, challenging times. And so my hope is that as readers sort of follow these characters through their challenges, that readers themselves begin to develop a sense of hope and possibility and a hunger for their own growth, be it personal, relational, or spiritual, or all of the above, that they begin to believe that it is possible, that it's hard work, but it is possible, and it is beyond rewarding to really dig down and do that.
Grace, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about the Carpenter and the Apprentice?
Well, thanks for that question. I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Substack, and those are two places where readers are welcome to, reach out and connect with me, learn more about the book. Certainly, if they have questions or comments, they can message me through either of those apps. The website is gracelzacaroli.com.
Okay, well, Grace, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Marianne.
Well, thank you, Grace. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, The Carpenter and the Apprentice. The Carpenter and the Apprentice is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And remember, support our indie bookstores. Make sure to visit Grace's website at Grace Zacaroli. That's Grace, LZACAROLI.com. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.